Good day everyone. In today's lecture, we'll be discussing about frequency meters. We'll be discussing about three types of frequency meters, that is ferrodynamic type frequency meter, electrodynamometer type frequency meter and ratio meter type frequency meter. Then we'll be discussing about a maximum demand indicator, that is Merz price maximum demand indicator, and finally we'll be discussing about trivector meters. All these meters we'll be discussing how all these meters are working and how it can determine the specific quantity for which it is designed. We will be discussing about frequency meters. Now when we are talking about frequency meters, there are many different type of frequency meters possible. The first type that we are going to discuss is ferrodynamic type frequency meter. Now in ferrodynamic type frequency meter, we can frequency meters are basically used so that we can measure what is the frequency of this supply that we are having. For example, whatever supply I have connected, I can determine the frequency of that supply using a frequency meter. So we will discuss about the first type. Now in the first type, let us look into the construction first. Looking at the construction, we can see that there is a fixed coil. This is the fixed coil. This fixed coil is connected to the supply whose frequency we have to measure. Now this fixed coil is also called as the magnetizing coil. Either I can call it as the fixed coil or I can call it as the magnetizing coil. Now this magnetizing coil is mounted on a laminated iron core. This is the iron core. On this iron core, the fixed coil is mounted. Now we can see that this core, it has a section which varies gradually with length. As the length is increasing, the size of the fixed core is keeping on reducing. That is, to the magnetizing, near the magnetizing coil, the size of the iron core, it is maximum, and as it is moving further, the size is keeping on reducing, and at the tip it is the area is becoming minimum. So here we can see that it has maximum area near the end and minimum at the other end. Now the moving coil, it is connected to a pivot because this is movable, so this can move. The movable coil is connected to a pivot over an iron core. It has a pointer attached to it. Now we can see that the terminals of the moving coil, it is connected to a capacitor C. It is connected to a capacitor C in such a manner that it will always carry a current. It will always that is there will be a phase difference between both the currents that are flowing in both the coils. To achieve this phase difference, I am connecting a capacitor C. So here we can see that here I will get the impedance of this coil to be XL and the impedance of this coil to be XC. So we know that for resonance condition, XL should be equal to XC. Now we know that at resonant condition we can find out the value of frequency F at resonance condition. Now for getting resonance condition, the value of XL and value of XC should be equal. This is the basic principle that we will be applying for this ferrodynamic type frequency meter. Now here we can see that when the magnetizing coil, when a current is flowing through the magnetizing coil, for example, let us take the value of current to be I. When it is flowing through the magnetizing coil, this current I, it will produce a flux phi. Now this flux phi, if current I is alternating in nature, then flux phi will also be alternating in nature, and because of this flux phi, let us neglect the resistance of the coil and whatever losses are occurring. We can see that phi and I both will be always in phase. Now as we know that phi is alternating in nature, it will induce an EMF E. Now this EMF E will lag behind by 90 degree. There will be a lag of 90 degree in the EMF that is induced. Now we know that the EMF induced, it will circulate a current IM. Because of this EMF, we'll know that a current IM will keep circulating in this magnetizing coil, and this current IM will depend on the inductance L, because as I have said, this the fixed coil, it is related to XL, so inductive part is there, so it will depend on the inductance L of the moving coil and capacitance C of the fixed coil, because as a component of mutual inductance is there, the value of Im will be dependent on both L and the value of C. Now here we can see that there are three conditions possible. That is, for example, if the value of XL, if we see this is the value of XL and this is the value of XC, if it at any point this is not matching, what will happen is this movable coil, it will move this side or it will move this side, so it to achieve a condition where XC is equal to XL. So here we can see that there will be two torques produced, that is torque due to the fixed coil and torque due to the movable coil. When these two torques are equal, then only my pointer will be showing the frequency. Now here as we can see that as electromagnetic forces are playing over here, we can see that this coil, it can move to this side or it can move to this side because it has to balance XC is equal to XL. Now at that time what we can do is which the pointer, when if the coil is moving this side, my pointer will move to the lower end, and if my coil is moving to the minimum area end, the pointer will move to this side. This means that the frequency of the supply is higher. So this is the basic principle on which this is working. Here we can see that there are three conditions here. Now let us look at the first condition. This is the first condition. Now in the first condition we can see that the moving coil will be considering the value of XL is greater than XC. Now here we can see that IM will lag E, that is IM will lag E by, this is E, IM will lag E by an angle alpha. The diagram is a bit unclear, so I'll just mention what are the phasor quantities. The IM, this is E, this is IM will lag E by an angle alpha, and because of this the torque that is developed will be TD is equal to IM cos, the angle we can clearly make out 90, that 90 plus alpha. 90 plus alpha, this is the angle that we are getting. So here we can know that the inductive component is greater than the capacitive component. So this torque will move the coil to a position where the inductive reactance should come down, because the inductive reactance is more. So the inductive reactance has to come down, because XC it cannot be moved, because XC is a fixed quantity. As we have seen in the previous diagram, XC is a fixed quantity, it cannot be changed. But XL can be changed. How XL can be changed? It is dependent on the movement of the coil. So XL's value is larger. So what I have to do is I have to reduce the value of XL. So for reduction of the value of XL, what I will do is the moving coil, it moves away from the magnetizing coil. It will move away from the magnetizing coil. So as it is moving away from the magnetizing coil, what will happen? The value of XL will reduce. Now as the value of XL is dropping, it will drop to a value where it should be equal to XC. Now when this is moving this way, the frequency, it shows that the frequency component is higher. Now let us look at the second condition. Now in the second condition, we can clearly see that the moving coil is considered to be capacitive. Hence the IM leads E by an angle beta. Now here we can see that the deflecting torque that is produced, TD, is directly proportional to IM cos 90 minus beta. Now here we can clearly see that the capacitive reactance component is larger. The capacitive reactance component is larger. Now the capacitive reactive component is larger. As we know that XC is fixed, only the value of XL can be increased. So previous case we have seen that for reducing the value of XL, what we did is we made it move further. Now to increase the value of XL, what we can do? We can move it nearer to the magnetizing coil. Now what we are doing is we have to make the value of inductive reactance larger. Now because of this, the increased inductive reactance is obtained by moving the moving coil towards the magnetizing coil. So as it is moving towards the magnetizing coil, the value of XL will increase, and XL is equal to XC condition I'll achieve, and from this I can clearly make out the frequency value will be lower for the second case. Now in the third case that we are having, in the third case we can clearly make out that in the third case the inductive reactance component will equal the capacitive reactive components. So as the phasor is not clear, this is IM and this is the value of E. We can see that both the values are in phase. So TD is nothing but IM cos 90 degree, cos 90 the value of cos 90 is equal to 0. That is, no deflecting torque will be produced. Deflecting torque is not produced. So if deflecting torque is not produced, that means if whichever position the movable coil was, it will maintain, it will stay at that position. So these are the three different conditions that are possible, and based on these three different conditions we can easily make out what is the frequency by calibrating a scale. What we will do is, previously known quantities will be giving here, and based on this we'll just mark. For example, one quantity I am giving and I am getting the frequency to be 50. I'll mark the pointer this to be 50. Another supply I'll give and I'll see that it is 100 that I am getting here, I am getting 0, and some markings I'll be doing in between. I'll calibrate the scale, and based on the calibration that I have got from known quantities, I can easily determine any unknown quantity by using the ferrodynamic type frequency meter. The second type of frequency meter that we are having is electrodynamometer type frequency meter. So as we have seen in the electrodynamometer type meter previously as well, here also we have two fixed coil. The fixed coil, it is divided into two parts. It is divided in such a manner that to the first fixed coil, a inductor and capacitor in series is connected to the first fixed coil. Similarly, for the second fixed coil as well, a inductor and capacitor is connected in series. Now what is the difference between L1C1 and L2C2? The difference is that the L1C1 is formed, the resonance circuit is formed in such a manner that it is the frequency F1, that this frequency F1 that it is generating will be slightly below the lower end of the scale. This is that the resonant frequency is slightly below, and L2C2, it is connected in such a manner that it will form a resonant circuit having frequency F2, where this frequency is slightly higher than that of the scale. Now we can see that a return circuit is there, that is, here I1 current will flow, here I2 current will flow. Both this current will return back through a path that is formed by the moving coil. So here we can see that the return circuit is formed through the movable coil. The torque on the movable element, it is proportional to the current that is moving through the movable coil. Whatever current is flowing through the movable coil, whatever deflection is produced, this deflection will be dependent on the value of I1 plus I2. Now here we can see that this current I1 plus I2, it is just because of whatever current is flowing through the fixed coil 1 and whatever current is flowing through fixed coil 2. That is, whatever current I am getting in moving coil, it is because of whatever current is flowing out from fixed coil 1 and fixed coil 2. The deflecting torque is directly dependent on the currents I1 plus I2. Now here we can see that if, for example, the fixed coil 1, it operates at a resonant frequency, XL1 is greater than XC1. So here we can see that the current I1 that I am having, the current I1 will lag the voltage, the whatever applied voltage is there, it will lag it. Now for example, let us consider fixed coil 2. Now in fixed coil 2, if for example XC2's value is becoming greater than XL2, here we can see that the I2 will lead the voltage V. Now based on this, we can easily understand that based on whatever values it is given here, there will be a lagging or leading component that is produced. Now we can see that the two currents I1 and I2, it is connected in such a manner that it will act in opposition of the moving coil. Now this torque produced by both these components will always be in opposition. So as we have seen that the torque of the moving coil and the torque of the fixed coil, when they are in equilibrium position, at that time only we will be getting the deflection. We will be measuring the deflection by the pointer. So here it is clearly understood that whatever torque is produced by the fixed coil and whatever torque is produced by the movable coil, both this will act in opposition. So here we can see that the resultant torque, it is a function of the frequency of the applied voltage. So depending on what we have seen that previously lagging or leading components are produced, and because of this, whatever resultant I am getting, it will be a function of the frequency of the applied voltage. So here we can see that the instrument scale, it will vary from 0 to 90 degree. That is the movement of the pointer, it is only it is possible only for up to 90 degrees. So using this as well, what we can do is we can determine the frequency of the input supply using the resonance, that is XL is equal to XC. This to achieve that condition, using this condition we can directly measure the what is the frequency that will be getting using electrodynamometer type frequency meter. This third type of frequency meter that we are having is ratio meter type frequency meter. So here we can see that it consists of a ratio meter which gives a linear relationship between current ratio and the deflection, that is ratio. Two circuits we are having, and both these circuits, the ratio of the currents will be taken, and based on this I'll be getting some deflections of the pointer I'll be getting. Now based on using this principle, I can directly measure what is the frequency that I am having. Now here we can see that there are two coils of ratio meter which are fed with rectified output currents from two separate bridge rectifiers. So here it is clearly seen there are two separate bridge rectifiers here, and the supply of bridge rectifiers, it is given to the ratio meter. This coil that I am having, the movable coil that I am having, this is called as the ratio meter. Now both this rectified currents are given to the ratio meter. Now we can see here that the input side of the bridge rectifier is connected to a AC supply. So it is clearly understood. Input side, both the bridges are connected. The input is connected to the AC supply whose frequency we have to measure. Now we can see that when the input of one bridge rectifier, it has a capacitor in series, and the other bridge rectifier, it has a resistance in series. So here also it is clearly understood that the output of the bridge rectifier 1, the output that I will be getting for bridge rectifier 1, it will be directly proportional to IC. Why? Because bridge rectifier 1 we are having a capacitive component, so it will be directly proportional to IC. So I can write it to be, it is directly proportional to F into Vc. The second bridge 2, it will be dependent, the current that I am getting for bridge 2, it will be directly proportional to IR. So IR is nothing but V by R. So here we can see that for bridge 1 I will get the current which is proportional to FVC, and for bridge 2 I will get a current which is proportional to V by R, that is depending on what element I have connected before the bridge. Now here we can see that the deflection theta, as I have said, it is directly proportional to the ratio of the two currents. So from here I can easily make out the ratio of the first current is FVC, this is V by R. So here by simplifying it, I get theta is equal to K1 into F, where K1 is nothing but 2 pi KCR, because the V will get cancelled out and K1 is so theta is equal to K1F. So here directly we can make out whatever deflections I am getting, that deflection is directly proportional to the frequency. Now this type of instrument, it has a linear scale of frequency. Now this type of instrument, it can measure frequency up to the range of 5000 Hertz. So it is clearly understood that using a ratio meter type frequency meter also I can measure the frequency depending on what deflections my pointer is showing. The next type of instrument that we are going to discuss today is maximum demand indicator. Now why maximum demand indicators are required? Maximum demand indicators are required for billing purpose, that is just to see if some industrial loads, if they are exceeding whatever they are permitted. For example, I am permitting one of my consumers to use 5 megawatt, that is this is the maximum limit they can exceed, but what they are doing is for 10 minutes they are using 2 megawatts, and for other 10 minutes they are using 10 megawatts. So whenever I am taking the average will always be for example, for the other 10 minutes again 10 minutes 2 megawatts they are consuming. So if I am taking out the average for this, the average will always it will be less than 5 megawatt, but we can see here that for some instant they are exceeding the limit that they have been given. So this will cause some problems in the transmission side, or this will cause some problems in my electrical system. So I have to determine what is the maximum demand which my consumer is utilizing. Now for that purpose we will be using an instrument, it is called as price maximum demand indicator. Merz price maximum demand indicator. So this is the instrument that is shown here. It is the Merz price maximum demand indicator. Now it is a unit which is combined with the energy meter. So Merz price maximum demand indicator, it is a unit which has to be combined with the energy meter. Now how this will operate, let us discuss the operation of this. Now the energy meter, what the energy meter will do, the energy meter will record whatever energy has been consumed, even if maximum demand is there, even if minimum demand is there, over a time period, what was the maximum energy consumed, it will be measured by my energy meter. Now energy meter cannot pinpoint what was the maximum demand at any point. Now for using this, what we can do is we can plot a chart. We'll just keep on plotting a chart. Now when I'm plotting a chart, for example, let me take the chart to be 1 month long chart. Now in this 1 month long chart, I have to find out where, for what portion I am having the maximum demand. So this is not possible. Therefore we will be using some instruments. That is why Merz price maximum demand indicator was thought for in the first place. Now when we are moving further, we know that it will only indicate the maximum value of average power over equal intervals of time. That is the energy meter that I am using. Now we can see here that it has a disk mechanism. That is the energy meter, it has a disk mechanism. Now this disk mechanism, it will drive a pointer. That is, a pointer is there. Now this pointer, this disk mechanism, this is connected to the Merz price. This is the Merz price maximum demand indicator. Now the energy meter's disk, it will be somehow using some gearing arrangements, it will be connected to the Merz price maximum demand indicator. Now here we can see that now it will drive a pointer. Now this pointer will be driven by this disk using some gearing arrangements. Now we can see here that now this gearing arrangement, this is connected. That is, this pointer, it is somehow connected to the energy meter. Now when this energy meter is rotating, some gearing mechanism will be used, and that gearing mechanism will try to move this pointer. Now we see that now this pointer, it is connected to a spindle. Now as we know that all the pointers, it will be having some spring arrangement, it will be having some moving coil, and it will be connected to a spindle. Spindle is nothing but the center rod on which all the pointers and all the other movable mechanisms are connected. Now to this there is a reset device. Now the reset device, why a reset device? A reset device it is used, that is the cam and the bell crank mechanism. The cam and bell crank mechanism, they are the reset device. This reset device is used to bring back the pointers to zero value. Now why this pointer has to be brought back to zero, we'll be discussing it in the coming points. Now we can see here that this pointer is held by a special friction device which will indicate whatever energy is consumed for the interval of time. Now what I will do is I'll select some interval. Let me take the interval to be 15 or 30 or 1 hour. What I will do is, for this interval, what was the energy consumed, this pointer will measure for example I am taking it to be 30 minutes. Now for 30 minutes, that is, for example, we are starting from 12 pm. Now from 12 pm to 12:30 pm, what was the energy consumed? From 12:30 pm to 1 pm, what was the energy consumed? That will be measured by this pointer. Now for example, let me consider the first instant. From 12 pm to 12:30 pm, the energy consumed was, for example, 100 units, and from 12:30 pm to 1 pm the energy consumed was, let me take it to be 80 units, and for the next half hour, that is 1 pm to 1:30 pm, the energy consumed was 120 units. Now keep this in mind. For the first half an hour, the energy consumed was 100 units, for the second it was 80 units, and for the third it was 120 units. Now what will happen is, this energy meter, it is recording continuously, it is recording the what is the energy consumed. Now what will happen is, in the first that is during the first half an hour, the energy consumed was 100. Now this pointer, it will move to this position. For example, let me take this position to be 100. Now what will happen is my pointer will come to this 100, and before the pointer we can clearly see that a pin arrangement is there. Now what this pin arrangement will do is, let us say, when the pointer position remains fixed unless and until in the next interval of time the energy consumed exceeds that which is shown by the pointer. Now when the pointer the pin arrangement, what it will do is, it will limit, that is, it will show the position till which my pointer has reached. For example, this is my pointer. To the pointer a pin arrangement is there. Now whenever this pointer is moving further, the pin will also move further. Whenever it is moving further, the pin will also move further. Now what is happening is, in the first instant it was 100. Now at 100 what happens is, this is 100, my pointer has reached here, and here the pin has also reached to this position. Now when the half an hour duration is complete, this cam, it will rotate. Now this cam will rotate and it will give a signal to the bell crank mechanism in such a manner that this pointer, it will return back to 0. That is, at 12:30 again the pointer will return back to 0. Then from 12:30 again it will start rotating, and again at 1 p.m. what is happening, the demand was 80, so the pointer will only come up to 80. That is, the pin is still at 100. That is, the pin is still at 100 units. These in the second half an hour interval, it is only coming up to 80. So this pin is not moved. Again at 1 p.m. what will happen is, this cam will rotate, and because of the rotation of this cam will be connected to some synchronous motors or some type of motor which is connected to some timing devices, which will give a signal, and the bell crank mechanism will again function, and because of this again the pointer will come back to 0. Now again from 1 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. as we have said, the demand was 120. Now this is 120 position. Now the pointer will move back to 120, and again the pin's position is moved. That is, it is shifted 20 units to the top. Now looking at the position of pin, I can clearly make out when, that is, what was the maximum energy that is consumed. Now for example, if I know what is the maximum energy consumed, I can easily calculate the average maximum demand. How I can calculate the average maximum demand? The average maximum demand is equal to maximum energy that was recorded. Maximum energy recorded divided by time interval in hours. For example, 120 was the maximum. 120 divided by 30 or divided by half, that is in terms of hours, I can easily find out what is the average maximum demand that I have used. Now here one point to be noted is that when the time period ends, that is the preset time period, it can be 15 minutes or it can be 30 minutes. When that ends, what will happen is, the cam controlled by a timing gear, it will momentarily disengage the pinion with the help of bell crank mechanism. So as I have said, bell crank mechanism, cam, both this will disengage the pinion, and what will happen is, using the spring force, the driving mechanism, it will come back to 0 position, and the pointer remains at its position, indicating the energy consumed during the past interval of time. For example, if the pin is at the back side, what will happen, this pointer will stay its position, only the pin will move. If pin is in the front, the pin will stay and the pointer will move back. Now this mechanism we can use, and this is called as my Merz price maximum demand indicator. Now using this, I can easily find out what was the maximum demand that my consumer consumed for a given period of time. Now moving further, the next type of instrument that we'll be discussing is trivector meter. Now what is trivector meter? All of us know about the power triangle. So in the power triangle, we know that this is the perpendicular is Q, this is P, and this is S. P is nothing but my real part, Q is nothing but my reactive part, and S is nothing but my apparent part. Now we know that S is nothing but VAH. S is nothing but VAH, and P is nothing but WH, that is watt hours, and Q is nothing but VAR, hours, watt hours. Now the whole squared. Now using this, I easily know that S squared is equal to P squared plus Q squared. That is from the triangle. We know all these things we know. Now what my trivector meter will do is, this meter will measure kilowatt ampere hour and also kVA of maximum demand. Now this meter, it can easily measure kilowatt ampere hours and kilowatt ampere reactive hours as well. It is used for measuring all these quantities. Now what this trivector meter will have is, it will have a kilowatt hour, that is a energy meter it will have, and it will have a reactive energy meter, that is kVAH. It will also have these two type of meters, and these two meters are connected in such a manner that both its readings are summed. Now for example, we can see here that now this is a basic picture depicting a trivector meter. Now here we can see that kVARH meter, it is connected to this, okay, and the energy meter, the shaft of the energy meter is also connected to a recording instrument. Now this, some special gear arrangement is used. Now for example, if this is rotating, this is also rotating, and both these speeds are recorded, and based on the speeds of how this is rotating, for example, if this energy meter is rotating with more speed, the readings of the energy meter will be recorded. If kVARH meter is moving with more speed, the recordings will be done because of the kVARH meter. Now some ratchet coupling arrangement is done. Ratchet coupling is nothing but, it is, for example, some gear is connected. Now to this gear, some stop mechanism I have given here. Now what will happen is, my gear can move in the front direction, but it cannot come back to the reverse direction. So some ratchet mechanism is used, some ratchet coupling is used, and these ratchet couplings, we can see that 5 gear arrangements are there. 1 2 3 4 5 gear arrangements are there. These 5 gears, it is connected to a final reading instrument, that is, we can see here kVH meter, kVARH meter, both are connected to a, using some special gear arrangement, both are connected together. Some ratchet couplings and gear mechanisms are used. All these together, it gives me the final reading, that is produced by my trivector meter. Now here we can see that both the meters, it will drive a summator through a complex gearing arrangement, and we can see that the summator, it will register the it will register the readings because of both these meters, and it has 5 different gear arrangements. So let us see what are the 5 different gear arrangements. The first gear that we can see is, it is when watt hour meter is driving alone at normal speed. That is first case. If unity power factor I am having, at unity power factor, we can see that only my energy meter will work. That is, only my energy meter will work. So this is the, because of energy meter, we know that energy meter, it is used for measuring the value of real power. So real power, energy meter, it will measure, that is cos phi, some relation with cos phi will be there. And we know that the fifth gear is when the reactive power, for example, when power factor is 0, reactive meter will work. Now we know that the reactive meter that I am having, it is Q. Reactive meter will function because of relation something like sin phi. So here one conclusion that I'll be making is, P, that is real power or energy meter relation, it will be somewhat related to cos phi, and the other relation, that is reactive relation, it will be somewhat related to sin phi. Now when it is unity power factor, we know that cos phi relation. So we can clearly see here that when we can clearly see here that this is a speed in percentage, and this is how the angle is increasing. The cos, we know that cos 0, the value of cos 0 is 1, and as cos is proceeding to 90, it is becoming 0. Sin 0 is 1, and as it is sin 0 is 0 and sin 90 is 1. So as it is proceeding, the graph is increasing. So here this is shown for 2 gears, that is first gear and fifth gear. The first gear when it is having unity power factor, and the fifth gear when the reactive power factor value is 0. When the reactive power factor reactive meter, when the power factor value is 0, the first gear, it will come into picture. So as I've said, 5 gears are there. So it will depend on the speed. The first gear will come into picture when unity power factor is there, and the fifth gear will come into picture when the value of power factor is 0. Right? So we, as I've said, 5 gears. So one first gear and fifth gear we have discussed. Second, third and fourth, 3 gears are remaining. Now let us discuss about the other gears. Now in the second gear, what will happen is, in the second gear, when the watt hour meter speed it is slightly reduced, the reactive meter speed will also be slightly reduced. Now here we can see that when the phase angle is 25 degree and the power factor's value is 0.925, we can see here that a cos phi relation is there, and because of cos phi relation I am getting 2 dash. This is 2 dash. This is my readings because of my energy meter, and this is the readings because of my reactive meter, right? Energy meter and reactive meter. This is the reading that I am getting because of my energy meter, and this is the reading that I am getting because of my reactive meter. Now it is summator. Summator means it will sum both the values of what rotations of energy meter and reactive meter, both it will be summed, and this is the final graph that I will get when the second gear is engaged. This is the final value that I will get. So here we can see that this is the final value that I will get when my first gear is engaged. This is the final value that I will get when my fifth gear is engaged. This is the final value that I will get when my second gear is engaged. Second gear is for when the value of power factor is 0.925. Then we know that in the third gear what will happen is, both the speeds, they are reduced by the same factor. So here the phase angle value is 45 degree and the power factor's value is 0.707. So this is because of energy meter, this is because of reactive meter, and this is the sum of both the values. The fourth condition is nothing but when the watt hour speed is completely reduced and the reactive meter speed is also reduced. So here the phase angle is 67.5 degree and the power factor's value is, phase angle is 67.5 degree and the power factor's value is 0.38. So here also we know that this is the because of energy meter and this is because of reactive meter. Summing of both these, I get the fourth curve that I am getting. So here we can see that 5 different curves I am getting because of 5 different gearing mechanisms. 5 different curves I am getting. Now if I combine all these curves, so this is the first, this is the fifth, the third, second and fourth, I can clearly make out that this instrument, it can easily the shaft, that the final drive from each gear system is taken to a ratchet coupling which is linked to a common resistor shaft. By this mean, the shaft will always be driven by the direct drive which has the maximum speed, while all the 4 slower shaft will remain idle. So here we can clearly make out that if I am looking at this is what graph I will get. So here I can clearly make out whenever lower speeds are there, in this position what will happen, when at this portion this will take over, and as this second gear is taking over, the first gear it will not move. That is, readings because of second gear will not be, readings because of first gear will not be registered because ratchet coupling arrangement I am using. Now here it is clearly we can see that the overall curve that I am getting, the overall curve 1 2 3 4 5, because of the peaks of the 5 gears. Now the overall curve that I am getting, it will register the drive which takes up the fastest, or the gear which takes the fastest speed. Now the maximum effective error in this case, if I am taking, it is not more than 1 or 2%. So using a trivector meter, I can easily measure the values of kVAH and kVA for maximum demand. Whatever maximum demand I am having, I can easily measure the values of all these. Already I am having a kilowatt hour energy meter is connected, so this can also be measured. That is, for maximum demand, all the values, all these parameter values can be easily determined using a trivector meter. So trivector meters are used in substations where the incoming power and the outgoing power, all the quantities I can easily measure. So here, as I have said, also the value of voltage or the value of current, value of frequency, all these can also be measured using the trivector meter.